Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Imagine More, Let's Get to Work conference. For those that are joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those that were here last week, we hope you really enjoyed that session, especially with the young men presenting. For those that couldn't join us live, I hope you've been able to watch the replay, and I know we've had a few questions in the chat room earlier for people that couldn't access that replay as they weren't sure where that was in their emails. That's now run out of the 7-day replay, so you'll be able to access that on our website, and it will go live on Monday. So just keep updated with checking in with our website, and you'll be able to access that information. I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I mentioned before the replay that won't be live till Monday, but you can actually access the 3 videos of the young men following this link on our website that's up on the screen now. And also for those new to webinar and Webinar Jam, you won't be able to see each other, but you will be able to see the presenters. So it's not like a Zoom call or a Teams call. It's you're only able to see the presenters, but you can actually ask questions in the chat room, and you'll see that just above where you're accessing the presentation. And feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentations, but we won't address them until after Anne has finished talking today. We love hearing who's in the room today, and what I want you to know is that we've actually got over 550 registrations for this conference. They're not all obviously coming on live, but clearly there is a really keen interest in this topic of employment, so it's very exciting. And those people are joining us from all over the world. We've got people registered from the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand, and across Australia. So it's very exciting. We just want you to remember too in the chat room that whatever you share is actually public unless you privately message the admin team. So if you could just keep it really respectful, especially if you're talking about your daughter or son with disability, because that will be able to be seen by everybody in the room today. If you have any tech problems, which we hope you won't, but if you can email Jackie on jackie@imaginemore.org.au, she will be able to help you out. You'll also notice that there is a speak icon. We won't be using that function today, that request to speak, but hopefully we can address any questions you have through the chat room. So before we formally commence today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Ngunnawal people on the land that we meet today, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where you are joining us today, which is from far and wide. I also want to thank the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Sorry if you're using an acronym for people that aren't familiar with that one. They have actually funded this conference that has enabled you to join us free today. And that's been done through the ILC Economic Participation Grant. They also funded us to develop those 3 short films of the young men in work that we launched last week. So if you haven't seen those, please go to our website and you can take a look, because they're a fantastic demonstration of how young men can find meaningful and valued work roles. We're very excited that we've actually got some additional funding where we can be delving deeper into what the discovery process is, what circles of support are and how you can get one started, and also developing another story of a young person in work. So they're in development now, and we'll keep you posted when they get going. So we only have one presenter today, Anne Greer, and she'll be joining us shortly. The session is expected to finish at 2:30 this afternoon, but if we've got a lot of questions, we can extend that for another 15 minutes if needed. So for those that don't know much about our organisation, Imagine More, I'm the Executive Director, Jan Kruger, and we're based here in Canberra in Australia, and we believe in a community where everybody is included, valued and contributes in meaningful roles. And we know that employment is a huge contributor to that, and hence our focus on employment. So finding work through our connections and networks in the community seems to have fallen to families to pursue. What we want to see is, especially the people that are joining us today who are consultants, support workers, employment services, community members, to actually support and walk alongside families to help them explore their connections and networks in the community to seek out valued work roles for them. What we've learned over the years is that there's often many and various job opportunities right in front of us, but we don't often see them. Discovering who the person is vitally important, as this is a process that informs us of what vocational roles we might explore for a person with disability that will result in success, rather than just aligning them with any job that comes our way. But equally important, it's aligning what is discovered about the person to that meaningful job. Understanding where to find these jobs that already exist in the community. There's a strategy that we're seeing that's working really well, is where people are going through their connections and their networks and getting into those workplaces to really observe what goes on in the workplaces, so then they can develop, carve and create jobs. An example of this is when Imagine More ran a workshop a number of years ago with an aligned organisation, Belonging Matters. We ran this workshop in a hotel in Canberra, and the people that were attending, we asked them to go out into the hotel and identify all the different roles and sub-roles within the hotel that they could identify by just simply having a look and asking a few questions. So what you will notice is they've actually come up, like this was in about 15 minutes. You'll see on the slide all of the different types of roles that they identified, and some of them are not so obvious, and they're the ones that I think that we need to be paying attention to. Some of these were such as like the conference manager. That person could do with an assistant, and you could find out what sort of role tasks they could delegate to somebody in an assistant role. Another one would be a vending machine stocker. So asking questions around how often does the vending machine need to be restocked, and how frequent that is and who does it. There's also, they identified a ticket validator. This could be a role for somebody that could then build some connections with the people that are accessing that hotel. And that's possibly a job that's quite repetitive. So if somebody's needing that and you've got those, you've identified that's a real skill for a person or a need, that could align really nicely. Another was an errand runner, finding out from the hotel how often that happens, how often the errands are needed, and if the person could do that job, but they don't necessarily drive, you could then get some support people doing the driving for the person, but they actually perform the errand itself. So these are just some examples of what can be uncovered if we're curious. And it's similar to being a detective, I think, is really observing, asking questions and delving into what happens in a workplace, but using the connections of the person and the family to get into the workplaces themselves. What we've also learned is by simply asking the people that we're connected with if they've got a job for our son or daughter doesn't really translate into a job opportunity, as they don't really know what we're looking for. So we've got to help these people work out what their workplaces do, and perhaps even looking at what jobs should get done but don't get done, because they could actually be the very jobs that fit really nicely for our sons and daughters with disability. An example, I know we get asked a lot, well, you know, what do we say to people when we get into the workplace or we're wanting to get into the workplace? And it could be as simple as asking, we know somebody that's very interested in this line of work and we want to understand a little bit more about what happens in the workplace. So would you mind if we could come in and have a look and ask a few questions and really understand what happens in this workplace, so we could take that back to the person that's interested in this particular role. So that's just one example of how you could approach a workplace. And notice that I wasn't sort of saying that, oh, we're trying to find a job for a person with a disability and then going down that sort of almost deficit description of a person. We've got to be going in there with our best pitch for people. And I know Anne's going to go into that today. So with no further ado, I want to actually introduce Anne Greer, who's a friend of Imagine More and has been doing a lot of work with Imagine More over the years. And we highly value her contribution in this important work. So we are sure you will find what Anne has to share highly valuable and useful today. But please, we will take the questions at the end of her presentation, but by all means, put your questions into the chat room as she's speaking. So Anne, if you want to pop on in now, that would be awesome.
Hi, everybody. Hello, everyone. It's lots of lovely friends today, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anne, and I'll pop your presentation up and you can get started.
Mm-hmm. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And here we are discussing one of my favourite topics, work and staying in work for people with disability, because I think that this idea that people with disability couldn't, shouldn't or wouldn't work is one of the most debilitating things that's happened to people over the years. And so we need to really support and help families and society to understand a bit more about why we should be seeing people with disabilities as productive and useful contributing members of our society. So, you know, I've entitled this slide, Why is Work So Important? He gets a pension, doesn't he? Because I think that for a lot of people, the issue of the pension, which is actually a really, really important thing for people to have the money ongoing, can then, in the yin and the yang of things, get to be the worst aspect as well, because then we think he doesn't need to work because he's got money. And also, by the way, the person themselves thinks, I don't need to work because I've got money. In fact, many people with disabilities, I think, end up with a kind of a cargo cult mentality. That is, they think that money just comes out of somewhere, out of the ether, and don't really ever even think about where money comes from. So these are kind of things that we need to be thinking about in relation to how we provide assistance to our sons and daughters or the people that we're working with, to make sure that they start to come alive to all the things that we as human beings in our society think are important, whether we think that's a good thing or not. So I think the contribution of a valued role to the positive image of people with a disability, pushing back on that negative image of people as unproductive and non-contributive to society, is absolutely crucial. And for those of you who've done any work in social role valorization or SRV, you would know that image, the positive image of people, is considered to be a very, very important part of how we provide support to people, ensuring people get their adulthood, and then to make sure that people have valued roles. And in our society right now, work is actually one of the most valued roles we have. So part of the thing that works against many people with disability, I think, is the idea that people aren't actually able to contribute, aren't able to do certain tasks, and therefore these things are not even offered to people as a sense of where we would head with regard to making a life real. And the power of a sense of contribution mastery over skills and the money earned builds to a much higher level of confidence and well-being and a positive self-image for that person. So I've seen this in my own children. I have a daughter, Jane, who actually has worked often, not so much at the moment, but she moved towns. But in terms of seeing the difference in Jane's understanding of herself as a result of getting work and getting paid and having a boss and having work colleagues, these things make a tremendous difference to how a person feels about themselves. And so, you know, as parents, we might think, I don't really see the point, and there's a lot of trouble in trying to make this all happen. And I need to say to all of us, we really must see the point, because this is actually the way we're going to help people get to the very best part of themselves. And I think the role of the developmental nature of skill building, because one of the things I think that's really worked against people has been this idea that people can't learn. And so I just will get on my soapbox for a minute to say that one of the most debilitating and terrible things that happened to people with disability way back is that label of intellectual disability. So can I say, it's not like I don't think people have disabilities. Please don't think I'm denying that. But I think that actually when we talk about intellectual disability, most times we don't even know what we're talking about. It's just a label, and that label allows us to cast off any opportunities for people. And in fact, in all my work so far, with many people who would be considered to have profound disabilities, I have never met a person who can't keep on growing and developing. And I think that the idea that people can't learn, won't learn, will never actually amount to anything is something that society gave as a kind of a wrapped up gift to parents very early on. And after that was given, it's very hard to let go of that idea, I think, that really people can work, can be part of society, can keep on growing and developing. And I'm here to tell you that I've done a lot of work in this area, and I can guarantee you that this is absolutely the way it is and should be. So we really do, all of us as stakeholders, need to understand the power of positive expectations. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, if you think about the deficits, when we talk about people's deficits, so there's a kind of a conversation in human services about deficit-based services and strengths-based services. And deficit-based services or deficit-based thinking is when we only think about what the person can't do. And I think that for all of us, we know that when we focus on what people can't do, we end up with a lot of can't do. And that many of the people we know and love, it's a little more complex to find out how you would help this person do than it would be for some other people. Although anyone who's got a teenage daughter or son would be saying, with or without disability, there's a big puzzle there. So I think that the idea of building a snowball of deficits to roll over the person, their family, and any opportunity is actually how things have been for a very long time for many, many people. And that actually is a very poor model. It's a very poor model of service, and it's a very poor model of thinking through or thinking about what's possible for any person with a disability or without. So the idea of kind of moving our thinking from the idea of that deficit-based snowball to a high expectation is part of what we need to be thinking about now. So, you know, when you think about the snowball of deficits running you over and the snowball of strengths pushing you along to the next opportunity. And I wanted to share a story with you about how when you work in a strengths-based model, how we can make sure that people get a really good opportunity and how those things will grow and grow into a bigger and bigger snowball. And this involves Crew, and Margaret Rogers is actually on today on this presentation. But many years ago, Crew rang me to say, would Jane come to Cairns? Margaret Rogers was working in Cairns then, to be part of a big consultation or a big presentation for families around what's possible. And I was already going to be there, so that would have meant that Jane had to come to Cairns on her own in the plane, and that she would be presenting. And my mum, who was the most marvellous parent, most wonderful grandparent, but very negative, you know, the glass is half empty, says to me, I don't know how Jane could do that because I can't understand anything she says. And I thought to myself, yeah, but some of your 80-year-old friends can, so maybe it's not that difficult. But of course, we said she's coming. So this is before PowerPoint. So Jane and I set it up so that we had taken photographs of things that she did during her day, because what Crew wanted her to tell people was how ordinary her life was, not in any kind of congregated services, not going off to any kind of services that kind of put people together, just really in her life doing what she did. So we took photographs of her catching the bus, going to TAFE, going to work, being out and about with friends, all sorts of things that she did. And we had photographs from her childhood, and she picked the ones she wanted to use. And I asked her what she wanted to say, and she told me. Now, Jane is not very clear in her speech. So we had dueling overhead projectors. One had Jane's photographs, and she had the microphone and the photos, and the other overhead projector had I'd written down what she was saying in case people couldn't understand her. And so we went through her presentation, and at the end of it, there was kind of mayhem. People were really very impressed with Jane's story because, you know, Jane's story wasn't one about a person being extraordinary. It was just about a person being ordinary. And sometimes I think we get overwhelmed by the extraordinary stories of the people with Down syndrome who are now running childcare centres or models or whatever. Jane isn't one of those people. She's just an ordinary person having an ordinary life. And so the message for the other young people in the room was, if you had a photograph, you could actually get the microphone. So people came up with their photographs and their microphones to really start to tell their stories out the front. And to me, that really emphasized the power of good role modeling and how hard it is for people to ever get any idea about what's possible for them if they never ever get that opportunity to try something because we decided that they don't have the skills to do it. So the deficit model would be, sorry, crew, Jane can't come because she can't really speak very clearly, and I don't see how you could be expecting her to be doing a presentation. And the strengths-based model is, thank you, we'll be there. And then we'll work out how we will make that happen. So this is not the end of the story, this is the beginning. As a result of that, crew asked Jane and I and a good friend of hers, Shelley Clark, to come to Brisbane and be part of the, at the Hilton, a big crew conference, over 500 people. And so we went to that conference and did our presentations. And by now, we had PowerPoint presentations and all sorts of other things. And as a result of that, someone from New Zealand was there, from CCS, and they asked us if we'd like to come and be part of their first integrated conference between Maori and Pakeha. So we said, yes, thank you very much. And Jane got a passport and travelled internationally and went to New Zealand to be an international speaker at a conference in Auckland. And it just has gone on and on. So Jane, in the days of the local area coordinators, went to many places in Queensland to tell her story. Once we were in Roma and she started to tell her story, and I thought, you know what, this has gotten pretty old and faded. I really should have looked at this before we came. And at the end of it, this man stood up with his tears streaming down his face and said, Jane, thank you so much. I realise now that I'm really gone completely the wrong way for my son, and I'm going home to rethink everything I'm doing. So Jane went from, I don't know how you could ask her because she can't speak very clearly, to an international speaker and an inspiration for many, many parents and families and people with disabilities. That's the power of a strength-based model. Get it? It's a pretty good story, hey? So in understanding the power of work, I think we really need to think about our other children, don't we? Because somehow or other, we have sucked the saveloy of believing that our sons and daughters with disability don't need the same things that our other sons and daughters do. Sometimes, not all the time, but it's kind of easier because it seems to be so complicated to work out how to make this all actually happen. And so I think in understanding the power of work and how that might really change things for people, we really need to be thinking about, how to do this and why we would. And of course, work gives us all of us status, doesn't it? Many of us define ourselves almost solely on what we do for work. And when people retire or lose their jobs, people find it very, very difficult to think about how to describe themselves or how to actually even be in the world. And I think that there's a lot of very sad things that happen for children who have disabilities where the same kind of conversations don't happen for him or her as happens for brothers and sisters. So, those age-old questions, and what will you be when you grow up? And someone goes, I want to be a fireman. And we go, that's fantastic. We don't say, darling, you can't do that because you've got cerebral palsy. Even if it's very clear, maybe even then, that this child might not be able to do that, we encourage people to do that. And yet when we have sons and daughters with disabilities, sometimes we don't realise what a powerful thing that is to start to build in a person's mind the idea that they could be anything when they grow up, especially as for some of us as parents, the fear of people growing up is so profound and strong that we find it very difficult to even imagine what that might be like. So I don't have any sympathy for you at all, because now my children are really elderly. I was joking with Jan yesterday to say that Jane is 45 and that's the age of the men I'm looking at. So I find it very difficult to imagine that I could have a child that age. So they do grow up, and I'm here to tell you that if you put the right ideas in place, you create the right framework for things. It doesn't always go perfectly, and it's not easy. Let's be very clear about that. But actually, magic happens. And so I'm here to tell you that that level of expectation has meant that when Jane was little and people asked me, when she said to me, I want to get married and I want to have children, and I said to her, I'm sure you'll find someone to love you, Jane. And in my heart, I was thinking, oh my goodness, is this possible? Jane went to work and found a man who did not have Down syndrome, who actually is a psychologist, who has some issues of his own, but actually met him, became friends with him, pursued him, and ultimately married him. And that, dear readers, is the end of the story. No. They moved to Bundaberg, and her supporters moved with her. And later this year, post-COVID, hopefully, if ever we get to a post-COVID state, we're going to start working on the idea of work again for Jane. So work is a powerful thing. It's where we find friends. It's where we find lovers. It's where we actually start to define ourselves outside our families. And this is what we all need to be doing, isn't it? And our sons and daughters with disability need this too. Because otherwise what we do is create a self-fulfilling prophecy that says, oh, he doesn't like to work, he's pretty lazy, blah, 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 without really understanding why that might be happening for this particular person. And it's not good enough to just write people off. I think that we don't need to be thinking about that. So I think the whole wonderful thing about, being in a work environment, forming social connections, celebrating milestones with your work colleagues, meeting and marrying sometimes people as a result of our working life, these are the things that we all get in our work. Why would we think that this would not be also important for people with disability? So I want to talk a little bit about my hatred for the concept of intellectual disability, because I think it works against the developmental model. So, when Wolf Wolfensberger talked about the three prongs of a social role valorization model, it was image, positive image, real valued roles, and a developmental model. And he said, if you couldn't do anything else for anyone, work on image, because image is so important, which we know is true, don't we, about all of us. But the developmental model to me is a very important thing. And for the last 13 years before I retired 2 years ago from that work, the service I worked in was working on a developmental model every day. Now, we weren't working, the developmental model is not about fixing people. People are perfect just the way they are. We're not trying to fix anyone. What we're trying to do is to make sure people have every opportunity to develop into the fullness of themselves. What people take from that and what they reject is really none of our business, but we need to make sure that we are offering people every opportunity to keep on growing and developing. And so I think often, I'm not saying every time, but often school is not developmental in nature, because, work concepts like learning to complete a task in a timely fashion are often not part of what happens in schools, both integrated opportunities and in special schools. These things aren't always part of what we're trying to achieve. So in regular schools for regular kids, what we're trying to do is train people how to be good employees, really. We're trying to work on that, work in a timely fashion, do what people ask you to do, be sociable, manage the situations as they come up. And sometimes that's not really readily available for some people with disabilities within school environments. I think that there's also, for a lot of people, especially when they're younger, for reasons we're going to talk about in a little while, it's very difficult for people to complete a task because they're not able to concentrate yet enough to sit and focus on something. And so often in the early stages, people might give kids an opportunity to do those things, and they're not set up and they're not able to do it. And then those opportunities don't ever get offered again. So one of the things I feel really strongly is if we're going to build great opportunities for work for people with disability, we need to make sure that we are building that muscle in people that allows them to concentrate and to work on something until it's completed. This is not the same as making people do things. Could I refer you to a remarkable document that's just been released by the NDIS on a code of conduct for workers, which is a beautiful document that outlines how to build in choice and control in every single way that when we work with people. And I love that. I love the way it works. I think it's a really, really phenomenal document to read. And I'll make sure that we get that to you on the website or wherever Jackie can find to put it. Thank you, Jackie. Often people are trapped in childlike roles in their families, not expected to contribute to family or society, and therefore relegated to the role of eternal child. And can I say, of all of the roles that people can be given in that deficit model, the one about not being given the right to grow up and to be an adult in their own lives is one of the saddest things I think that can happen to people. And it's so easy and so insidious for all of us to forget that a person has grown up. And it's a gift when a person themselves is very clear about their status and they're really clear to defend their right to be an adult. Because often when you're still doing a lot of the basic things to assist and support a person in their day-to-day life, it is very hard to remember that this person is growing up. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do in terms of helping people manage this better is to think about the milestones that we celebrate for all our children and make sure that those milestones are being celebrated for the child with disability as well, because sometimes that doesn't happen. And I know children who don't get a birthday party because A, there may not be other children to come, or B, everybody is so overwhelmed by what needs to happen every day for this child that it's very difficult to actually get things set up for birthday parties. But I think that having people say to you, oh my goodness, what, you're 15 already? I can't believe it. I remember when you were 5. You know, all the things that we say to other children. The places and the spaces where we get to talk about those things are where we are celebrating milestones. And sometimes I think we could do a lot better with those things. Now, please, if you are a parent sitting out there now, one of the 208 people online with us or the others who will be joining later on the recording, this is not designed to make people feel bad about what they have or haven't done. Can I say to you that actually feeling guilty about what you haven't done comes with the role of parent, not the role of parent of a child with a disability. And actually being guilty about what hasn't been done is kind of interesting, but not very useful. What we need to do is once we work out what we can do it. And you know what? If we can't do it, let it go. Because in the end, being present and loving is actually the most important thing for every parent. And after that, you know, if you can't do it yourself, sometimes there's someone else around you might be able to co-op to help you with these things. I felt when my children were young, I felt that I was very alone in that world, and I felt very unable to act on too much because I was just getting up every day and putting one foot in front of the other. And that is absolutely the way it is for many families. I know that, but I think that sometimes when you can get your head up, you can hold an aspiration for a different way of being that you might not have any chance to do until the person's a bit older. So I think the other thing that happens in the world of intellectual disability is the people who know me well will tell you I hate the word client. So there's a few C words in the world that I'm banned. I love to swear, but I think client is one of the worst swear words in the world, and I will not say it. Well, I've said it now, but, you know, only for the purposes of this. So I think that what we need to be doing in modern services is moving our support from that concept of clienthood, trapped in services, having people tell you what to do and keep you safe and support your disability, into a world where what we're trying to do is build citizenship with and for that person. That's what the new services of the world are going to be doing. We've got to move away from this idea of a deficit-based model into a strengths-based model, and we need to be thinking through what will it take to help this person be a competent, contributing, valued person in their community. And of course, work is one of those things. In order to be there, you have to have a certain level of skill. And I think there appears to be a complete lack of understanding of what it takes to teach people with these kinds of disabilities a skill. There's either an unwillingness or a lack of consciousness about turning something like he can't learn into asking what would it take for him or her to learn. We seem to find that very difficult to think that way. So I'm going to talk about these things now for a little while, the things that might go against people's capacity to learn. And these are things that have been well known for a very, very, very long time. So yes, Sandra, I hate the word customer too. In fact, I hate almost every C word, consumer as well. All of them are pretty, different words. They're not really the ones. People say to me, what do you call people if you don't call a person a client? And I say, I call them by their name or the person I support. Funnily enough, in 13 years of direct service provision, managing a service that was very person-centered, I never had a problem in not calling a person a client or a consumer or a customer. So there you go. So you may say, I tried, as I did, desperately when my son or daughter was young, and it seemed very difficult for him or her to learn new things. And actually, that is very true. So it is very true that people often do have issues with learning, but they might just not be quite the things that you think they are. And the great shame now internationally is that this information is well known, should be well known, has been available for at least 20 years, but no one actually seems to know how to work it, maybe longer. So the first thing I want to talk about that is a big barrier to learning is when people have sensory movement differences and diversities. So when a person has a sense, so can I say that, we used to think about people having an injured brain or brain damage, or we had all these words we used when my kids were younger. But when we started to give people MRIs, we discovered people's brains were perfect. There was nothing wrong with the brain at all. And what we now know is, and we knew then, by the way, as well, is that every bit of information that comes to you comes into your brain through your senses. And every movement in your body is kind of by your volition. So the notion of movement differences first started with Anne Donlan and Martha Leary in a book called Movement Differences and Diversity in Autism and Mental Retardation in 1995. Now, don't get too overwhelmed by the mental retardation word. In America, this is still, I think, quite a strong word that people use without any kind of stigma, apparently. But they did change that and republish that as Autism, Sensory Movement Differences and Diversity in 2012. And this book, available through CRU, by the way, Community Resource Unit in Brisbane, is actually like a little primer for how we should be thinking about the way we organise opportunities and learning for people. So they defined a movement difference as a difference, interference, or shift in the efficient, effective use of movement. So people can't actually get their bodies moving intentionally. As a disruption in the organisation, regulation of perception, action, posture, language, speech, thought, emotion, and or memory. And in 1972, Moshe Feldenkrais wrote, our self-image consists of 4 components that are involved in every action: movement, sensation, feeling, and thought. And, many of you would know Feldenkrais because a lot of people go and do his classes. And he was very, very clear about the way we move our bodies. And if we aren't able to move our bodies intentionally or in the ways we need to, it can make it very difficult to learn or to get through the things we're trying to do in our world. So Oliver Sacks, in his account of awakening patients from post-encephalitic comas, in his book Awakenings, diagnosed what happened next as movement disorders. So people woke up from the coma. He gave them very, very big doses of L-Dopa, and they woke up all intact. Their brains were intact, but they had this movement difference, which made it very difficult to actually move intentionally. So movement differences include the inability to start a movement, the inability to stop, so what we used to call perseveration, the inability to switch or make transitions from a topic of conversation, a rostered shift change, moving from room to room, in or out of a car, the inability to sequence, and this goes directly to learning. So how to put together a combination of actions to complete a task. And if you have movement differences, and many, many people with disabilities do, it's not surprising that you can be potentially diagnosed as a person with an intellectual disability or as a poor learner. And I remember many years ago, a woman who was very well known to me, she was a big woman and her parents were little tiny people. And they used to be trying to get her up out of a chair, and they'd be trying to pull her up like little tugboats, trying to get her out of the chair. And all she needed was a little tap under her elbow and she would magically rise. She just couldn't get the movement started. And she didn't have any way of telling people that she couldn't get the movement started. And I've met many, many people who start doing something unwise and can't stop. You often see these people doing these things, laughing and giggling, dysregulated, doing this stuff and not being able to stop. And people wrongly assume that this person is doing this to get at them or because they think it's funny, when in fact the person is completely out of control, and it's to do with these kinds of problems. So these aren't behaviors. This is the body responding to certain kinds of stressors or certain kinds of demands being placed on it. It's not surprising that people with movement differences who found it difficult to switch in the way that I described before are often people who have big difficulties at shift changes, rostered changes, when people are coming and going. And many, many people I've worked with, workers have instructions to say, you come and you go quickly, you don't dally, because the person needs to know that you are going and the next person is coming. And that's because they have a movement difference that makes it very difficult for them to switch from person to person. And the last one, which is the big one and very relative to work, is this issue of being unable to sequence a task. So, when we break down a task and we teach it to people, the person, this is my own part of the theory, I believe that people find it very difficult to retain the memory in their body of the actual sequence. So, when you go to the ATM and you forget your PIN number, if you just relax for a little moment, sometimes your body will remember the combination. Well, I think that might not be so available to many people with disabilities that we know and love. And so for them, they don't have that backup plan. So they need to learn the task, but they don't have the backup of their body's memory to help them remember these things. So this is a very, very big deal. It can be actually, once you understand this, you can help people manage this a lot better, absolutely. But you need to understand it first and know that this is what's being impacted on the person. So just have a little drink here. If you have any questions about this, I'm very happy to answer them at the end. With sensory processing, some of you will be talking about sensory and some of you will be talking with quite a big authority about it. But I wonder how many people really understand the role of the sensory system on our ability to take in and understand the world. So there, with our perfect brain, we have a whole range of senses that bring information into our brain systems. We hear things, we smell things, we taste things, we move, and our vestibular system it's our internal fluid between our ears, middle ear, that's actually working to balance us. We need to know where we are in time and space in order to actually pick things up or fulfill a task. Our tactile systems and our visual systems are all of the ways that information goes to the brain. And actually, for many people, and for every child between the ages of 0 and 7, this is something that every child is working on. And so that's why you see little kids in supermarkets who are having a meltdown, and we might think, oh, that mother should just blah, blah, blah. But in fact, that child's sensory system is not bedded down yet. And so they're oversensated from the noise and the whatever. I need to tell you that now in my DOE teach, I'm still not very good at my sensory system is still not bedded down very well. So I've got a great deal of empathy for people who have got this problem. So, for example, you can have a problem in your auditory system, which means while people are talking at you or to you, you could be having noise coming into that system like a jet engine or a helicopter right beside you. Can you imagine the stress that many people might be feeling if this is the way things are? Or your sense of smell might be so finely tuned that a smell comes into your space and that distracts you completely from everything else that's happening. Or your vestibular system is hyper, that is, it's busy, needs a lot. So you need to be on the move all the time. Can you imagine how hard it is to learn when you're never actually planted anywhere, never using gravity to get yourself down so you can concentrate on one thing? So you can actually be affected 1, 2, or every domain. You can have all of those things affecting you, or you might just have one thing. And you can be both seeking or defensive in the same system. So my son, Val, is seeking in his visual system. He's looking for more and more light, but then sometimes he is kind of saying enough, because he gets oversensated by it. That's very, very, kind of puzzling for some people. So this has a profound effect on learning and behavior. And when these things are operating on people, this is not behavior, this is the body responding. Two completely different things. Looks the same, but they're very different. And some of these can be moderated or abolished by establishing proactive and reactive strategies to meet the body's needs. Now, this is the province of occupational therapy, and not every occupational therapist is actually a fan or understands or even studied sensory processing. And some occupational therapists will even say to you, oh, there's not a great deal of research to prove this. This is absolute rubbish. Here in Townsville at James Cook Uni, Dr. Paul Pagliano, who's a close colleague of mine, has been working on this for years. He's published books on it. He gets really irate when people say this because that is absolutely not true. We know a lot about the sensory system. Why don't we know that in services? And why aren't families taught about this so we could help our sons and daughters learn more effectively and become much more contributing partners in citizenship? So I'm sure you might have some questions about that. Very happy to talk about that later. So, you know, the role of family in building this positive expectation of work, you just couldn't imagine how important that can be. And, you know, many families have very strong work ethics. My own family has a very strong work ethic. Everyone in our family is a hard worker. And so it's not surprising that every person in our family, including the people with disabilities, think work is actually quite important and are very keen to be part of that. So we've been encouraged to see people as eternally helpless and childlike for all the reasons that I've just spoken about now. And that can really make that very difficult for families to believe anything different. And I know that there are many families out there who are probably saying right now, you know what, when I've talked about these things, people pat me on the head and act like, come on, you're not really accepting the child has a disability. That's not true. We aren't trying to fix people. I'm going to say this over and over. We aren't trying to fix people. We're trying to make sure that people are the best they can possibly be. And part of that would be at least being offered the opportunity to work. And right now, people are not offered the opportunity to work. They're not even close to having an opportunity to work. And the systems in place aren't really set up for people with more significant needs to ensure that people find a job, get trained into a job adequately, and then get supported to keep that job longer than some financial incentive. 3 months after a financial incentive ends, I think we find a lot of people are no longer in their work. Forgive me for being so cynical. So many families have little opportunity to get their heads up to even visualize a positive future and to paint a positive future for themselves or for their sons and daughters, and to ask, what will you be when you grow up? And, you know, I remember as a single parent with 2 kids with disability and a child bracketing, a child in the middle who, to all intents and purposes, didn't have a disability. For a lot of time, I was holding an aspiration of a great life for myself and for those kids. But it wasn't always true that we could make that happen. So there was a lot of time when we weren't actually having such a great life, but we were always hoping that something would come about to make things better. And in fact, holding that aspiration was one of the best things I ever did, because slowly over time, things did get better, as they always do. And it was a really magical thing to kind of see those kids grow up and see opportunities become more possible for them. And I think, I don't think that the systems that are in place presently to assist with finding and keeping a job are particularly reassuring to families who worry a lot about, you know, setting people up for failure. I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So when we're trying to find a job, what does that actually take? We really need to understand the importance of what a good match really means. So, and so I'll talk about this, and then I'll give you some stories. So people need a job that will deliver some social connections for that person. A person's got their pension, so they don't necessarily need money. So if they're going to go to work, what's the payoff? So going to a job where there's no one present ever at all, is not necessarily, unless that person is deeply introverted, going to be actually the job that is for what we are hoping to achieve in work. And, you know, I've had people find jobs for my daughter, and then they were in a place where they would never be able to get there without transport. So that would mean they would be relying on their job coach to get them to and from work, or me. And that to me is not a good match. We need to get work where public transport's available, or where there's a way to organise a lift, or there's some other thing that happens to get people to and from their jobs. And I think that a job, it needs to reflect the stated interests of the individual. And, you know, many years ago when Jane first left school, I was running an employment service here in Townsville on a managing management committee for a service in Townsville. And Lisa, who was the job coach working with my daughter, we found her a job where the man was desperate for her to come and work for him in a coffee shop at the Willows. This was a perfect job. She could ride a bike to the bus stop. She could catch the bus to the Willows. She was very good with directions, so she could, just get off the bus into the shopping centre, into that work. And we were just beside ourselves with happiness. We were forgetting that she had told us she wanted to work in admin. So the work started, and here my girl, who's such a work-oriented person, is suddenly sleeping in, missing the bus, not turning up. And Lisa came to see me, and she said, I don't know what's going on. This isn't Jane. And I said, I think maybe the match is wrong. Maybe we didn't listen to what she really wanted to do. And so Lisa and Jane went out into the front courtyard in my house and had a glass of wine and had a chat about things. And Lisa came back in and said, bingo, that's not the job she wanted. So here we are with a perfectly wonderful job, with a perfectly wonderful employer, but actually not the job that Jane wanted. And so we knew that then, because she has such a great work ethic, if she wasn't turning up for that job didn't float a boat. If it doesn't float your boat and you don't need to work, then we need to make sure that people are going to be happy in that job and someone else will love that job. So, yes. And so the job coach must be in possession of real skills about how to teach the job seeker the job. And can I say that there is a remarkable clip on YouTube by the wonderful Mark Gold, who passed away way too early, who was a early pioneer in the belief that all people with disabilities should be working way back. And there's if you type in Mark Gold bike break systematic training, I think it is, or something like that, even Mark Gold, it will come up and you'll find a man in a really awful shirt with an awful mustache, but he'll show you how to teach this person who clearly has a very profound disability how to assemble a bike brake, B-R-A-K-E. And the purpose of this demonstration was to prove that anybody can learn a job. And once a person's got a job, they can be working for money, because that was his great ambition in life for people. And so you should have a look at that, because it's a very inspiring little clip, and shows just how much people can do if we work out how we do, how we teach people. That was a system called, I think it's systematic instruction. And there are people in Australia who can teach that, and there's plenty of people who can teach us how to break down a task and teach that to an individual. So if a job coach doesn't have that skill, and they have a person who needs that for all of those issues of movement difference or sensory processing, that is actually setting up the job coach and the person that they're getting into work for failure. And I feel that is a very, very important thing, that we need to get a lot of information out to people generally about how people with disabilities learn and how to teach people. And Mark Gold's catch cry was, he didn't learn it this way, try another way. And so that was his absolute anthem, mantra, try another way. And I love that, because actually we've got all the time in the world to find out how the person that you love and you would like to see working, or the person you are puzzled about to get work, we do have all the time in the world, unless, of course, you're in a DES service where you've got no time at all, where you can actually get people learning how to do a task. And I think job coaches and providers need to be very aware of the issue of financial incentives. So I understand the nature of financial incentives, and we battled this way back in that service all those years ago, about whether to offer those financial incentives or not. And I've met with a lot of DES providers and job coaches who say they never, ever bring up the idea of job incentives unless the workplace asks for that. But I think once that's established, if there's going to be an incentive for the person to work there, and if that's what everybody else gets, probably it's fair enough. But there needs to be a very clear commitment from the employer that says this is not just a job. This is not like a social work placement for the person. No one needs a social worker job. What people want is a job that they're going to have until they don't want that job anymore. And so thinking that near enough is good enough is actually not good enough at all. And we need to be really making sure that we are working very hard to give people a chance to get real work and keep their jobs. And the people around them who are going to help them do that need to understand what that takes to make that possible. So, did you know that a study, which is now a very old study, in America across the 4 major universities, found that for everyone, this is not for people with disabilities, 75% of what keeps people in jobs is their social skills, and 15% is work skills. Now that's a pretty, 15% is work skills. So, you know, those people who are very socially adept, and there are many, many people with disabilities who are quite lovely to spend time with. This is a very hopeful thing. And for those people who need to learn social skills, if you're the parent of a little person now, it's a great time to start teaching people those things. And if you're the parent of an older person, to start giving people information about why it's important to greet people, why it's important to know greet people by name, all the different things that we might need to help people do. And if they can't do that, then we need to start working on the explanation of why this person doesn't do these things. Because remember, people don't need to get fixed. If you are very deeply uncomfortable by looking into people's eyes because your autism is that way, then that's okay. We can just explain to people you're not being rude. We just need to work out how to actually, that interface between the person with disability that we love or we support and the world and the community. How do we actually present this person to the world and this community in a way that helps the community to understand it, the person and the things that might be happening. And I think we really need to make sure that we know what the learning needs of the job holder are and what things really draw their attention and what rewards them. Now, I'm not saying, I'm a person who does positive behaviour support plans, but I'm not a person who's very keen on rewarding people, like external rewards. I am very keen on helping children and adults engage with their own success. So the person's actually feeling successful, and that is what's innately rewarding to the individual. So sometimes, you know, you might have some rewards going for people, but generally what we're trying to do is to get that person on board with us so that they realise that this is a really important thing to do. And the job coach must be able to identify the sweet spots in the work environment and exploit them to ensure social connection and engagement is happening. So Neil Barringham from A Place to Belong in Brisbane talks about the sweet spots in the work he does with people who are homeless and trying to help people find a home and a safe place. And I love that concept of the sweet spot because, you know, when you go out and about with people a lot, as I do, I see all the time that there are places where people are intrigued, keen, love it when the person gives them some attention, very focused on making this person feel welcome in their shop or wherever that person is at the time. And when we see those opportunities, or in the workplace, when we see those opportunities, the job coach has to be able to identify that and take careful note of that and work out how to exploit that in the nicest way of using that word. We don't want to exploit the individual. We want to exploit the situation and make sure that we can ask that person for help if we need to, and to negotiate what would be a reasonable amount of help to ask of that individual in the workplace. And, you know, there's a lot of other things that happen that break down work placements as well. A friend of mine who is a very competent worker has worked at Bunnings now for probably 10 years that I know of. But when he first started there, he's got a very big auditory integration problem. He's able to speak, he's able to tell people how he is. He had leukemia as a child, and that caused some difficulties and some complexities for him. So when he went first to Bunnings and they asked him to do something, he'd learn that task, he'd do it really well. And then the supervisor would come up and say, come over here and do this thing with me. And he would be completely lost. He would just completely lose his place. And he wouldn't be able to do it. And one of the things that had to happen for him was that his supervisor and those people who might take the supervisor's place had to work out what they would do to help him segue from one position to the other and then help him relax so he could learn the new job. And when people learn these things, it's a remarkable thing to watch how willing people are to set people up for success. But if you can't interpret that for the individual, for the work, you know, the employer or the supervisor, how will they know that? And so we need to know those things about the person we're working with and get that straight. And further to that, proper communication between the job find agency and the employer, and a very clear identification of the different roles that they all play is absolutely crucial. And if I had 5 cents for every person with disability who has said to their job coach, when the job coach delivers the bad news that the boss isn't happy with them, and the person's answered back, "You're not my boss," I would be a rich woman, which I'm not. So the fact of the matter is, the boss is the person who delivers the information to the worker. not the job coach. Because if we get those roles all mixed up, what we end up with is this kind of fuzziness about what the role of the job coach is and what the role of the boss is. And actually, most people, who go to work have to work out pretty soon that you have to do what the boss asks you to do unless it's unreasonable. And in doing that, we may as well get the practice in pretty early. So it is very important that communication that is communicated right from the beginning of the negotiations to make sure that we've got that clear in our heads. And I think close attention and communication to what's occurring in the work site is absolutely crucial. So that job coach has to be onto it. And this is not very easy from a DES situation now, to know what's going on in that workplace and to deal with issues before they blow up. And, one of the things that always sets me chill is when people say so-and-so got a job and they don't want anyone to come in and help task analyze the job or work out what the job is. And I can guarantee you that almost without exception, that job will be gone in 3 months, because without that help, the boss won't know what to do and people will start to feel overwhelmed by what's being asked of them. And this is a problem. So we need to be very clear about the need to get these roles in place and get people there to do their jobs and to make sure that people are safe, their jobs are safe and being looked after as much as possible. So, there's some of us who think that it's almost a lost cause in trying to get work through the system. And many, many people have found other ways to make this work. And, there are people all over Australia. It always interests me when people talk about people who are self-managing and services talk about how, oh my goodness, how will they actually do the right thing? And I think to myself, especially when it comes to work for people with disabilities, the people I know around the country who have started up businesses for their sons and daughters would make most people's heads spin round and round their necks. They'd be so stunned to see how well people do and what they've been able to achieve. And so later on in this series, you're going to talk to Jo Lynham, Emma's mum. And Jo actually, I'm not going to tell that story because she is, but she set up a paper shredding business for her daughter because she couldn't think of anything else that Emma could do at that point. And Emma moved from being a client of services into being an owner of a business who had clients. And I think that's just such a powerful thing. And that story just goes on from strength to strength. There are options like Jan was alluding to, at the beginning of this, there's many, many things that people could be doing in their own small businesses with support from their workers or from other people. And so I know people who've got garden waste shredding. I know a little fella here in Townsville who's got a little dump run. So his dad has been working on this since he's now 17, nearly 18 and leaving school. But since he was about 14, his dad has had a little business going. It's called Jobs for his name. And in that business, on the weekends, they go to people's places and they get light stuff to take to the dump and do dump runs for people for money. And this is a really powerful thing because it's teaching this guy how to work and why you might want to work. And of course, it's all around interacting with people because he's an uber extrovert. So he loves all the interactions with people and he's innately rewarded for doing that because people are so thrilled that they're there to take their rubbish away and he's actually part of it. My son had a coin-based coffee business, which went underwater when we had the floods here in February last year. Luckily, we've got 2 machines. So we're about to get the other machine out and we'll put that into my building where we're going to have about 50 men working in and out of the building over the next 6 months, doing a remediation work on the externals and painting in and out. And so we're going to put that coffee machine into a common area. It's a machine where you put money in and you get coffee out. And so people will be able to get a coffee at any point during the day that they want one for a very small amount of money. And that would mean that Val will have to come into the building every day to service the machine, empty the coins, bank the money, and make sure that he's got all of the supplies he needs to keep it all topped up. And he's supported in that by the people in his team to do that. And so we've been looking for quite a long time now for a suitable place for that coffee machine. And I think we've kind of come on the place. And this adds such a layer to what happens for Valen during the day, because, we often think, oh, well, what do workers do during the day? They're just wandering around. Well, unless we find real things for people to do, that's what people will do. Everyone will be wandering around, and they are, because in a place like Townsville, we have the Strand. there are many, many people wandering up and down the Strand all day, not a bad place to be, but not actually gainfully employed, not contributing, not actually really being part of anything, just kind of around things, not really of things. So finding real work is very important. And I think later on, or maybe you have already heard about Cameron, who actually has a digital transfer business, moving slides into digital media. So there are many, many things. There's scanning businesses, scanning documents, all sorts of things that people can do. And it really is as wide as our imagination, and trying to find that thing that might be the right solution to the problem. So lastly, just to say, if you're trying to work out what to do, you might want to look at a scheme called Project Search in Cincinnati. It's another scheme established in Brisbane around the same idea, where they have people working in a hospital. And one of the women in Cincinnati, who was a person with Down syndrome, who is considered to have quite a significant level of Down syndrome, also happens to have a photographic memory. And so she sets up the operation, the trays with all the instruments for the operations. She does that. That's her job. And she's actually the best person in that hospital for doing that job. Who knew? So that's me. I've raved on for a long time. I'm sorry. But I'm very open to now some questions or some thoughts or ideas of things that people might have got from that conversation.
Thank you, Anne. That was awesome. We've got a few questions coming through. But look, thank you so much for addressing that and helping people understand the difference between people that have that movement difference and sensory processing impacts. So, and then how we can be thoughtful around how we can support people through that. One thing I'd love to, a few things came up for me where, through the young men's stories around getting into meaningful employment that we showed last week, the importance of identifying and the job coach helping identify what is the culture of a workplace and really trying to embed people in that culture. That's something that Jack's done at University of Canberra. He's an AFL fanatic, so he got the footy tipping going there. And it's just a great way to help him then have those conversations in the corridor when he runs into people and build that relationship with his colleagues. So I think that that's another really important role that the job coaches need to pay attention to. And I'm just wondering whether you can share a bit more about, I know you've got some stories around Val with the sensory processing around the sunglasses and how that's helped him, move into different areas of the community more successfully.
Yes. So when Val was much younger, for many, many years, he couldn't really get into any shopping centre. He is male, so maybe he didn't really want to go. Just a joke. No, he did want, well, we wanted him to go, and he couldn't cope. And he would just hit the ground and cry and yell and just call out, I can't see, I can't see. And this is years before I understood about sensory processing. It got so bad that I couldn't take him anymore. I just couldn't cope with it was just awful. Anyway, his dad, who was a remarkable man, continued to take him to places. And one day he took, because he's a fisherman, he took him in to buy a peaked cap and some, not infrared, what do you call them, polarized sunglasses, to help, because that's what he does. So he used to joke and say he got that cap so that when Val had a seizure and fell over, he would fall onto the cap before he fell onto his nose, which is John's very, very weird sense of humour. Anyway, he put these things on Val and they went into the shops, and Val walked through the shops without any problem whatsoever. And that's when we started to realise that when Val said he couldn't see, he really couldn't see. His sensory system, his visual system, was completely overloaded by the movement and the noise and all the things that was going on in the shopping centre, and the peak cap and the glasses cut that down and helped him to manage that differently. And even now, all these years later, he still will say, if you're walking through a shop, he doesn't have those outbursts anymore of any kind, but he might say to me, I can't see, Mum, and I'll go, just put your glasses on for a moment, Dal. He'll put them on. Sometimes he'll keep them on, and sometimes he'll just put them on, reset, and take them off again. And as soon as he does that, he's able to see again. So I think for a lot of people, these things are occurring, but no one understands that. No one understands that this is what's going on for the individual. And we think that they're kind of saying, I don't want to be in the shop. When in fact, well, they are saying, I don't want to be in the shop because I can't bear it because of all the lights and the fans and all the things that happen. And we know, of course, things like fluorescent tubes are the worst thing in the world. If you've got those in your house or anywhere where people are working, you might need to work out how you'll accommodate. You can't ask the boss to take the fluorescent tubes out, but you might need to negotiate for the person to wear glass, some kind of coloured glasses inside, Erlen lenses, or to wear some dark glasses, something to cut the flickering from those lights, or maybe some earbuds to just cut the noise from the burr that happens with those fluorescent lights. So there's many, many things that are working in the environment against people, and often we don't really recognise that or understand that,
Thank you. I've got another question here around, can you please provide suggestions on how to get someone engaged with their own success? So instead of using the rewards and bribes to keep them, moving forward, and it's that intrinsic motivation, isn't it?
Yep. I think the first thing is to stop acting like you're in charge of your child, or if you're a worker, you're in charge of the work of the person, and start to actually gently hand the control back to the individual. And this often means slowing down what we're doing, not actually, kind of pushing things along as fast, and waiting for that person to take in what we've asked to happen and work out how to make that happen. Now, if I don't get back to this, you have to really help me there, Jan, but I'm just going to go on a sidebar for a moment. Val, who's now 38, in the last year or two has started to give us intentional communication about something he might want or something that has happened in a way that he's never been able to do before. Because he's always spoken, but he's spoken to check for obsessive compulsive needs. When's Dad coming home? Where's the fishing line? All these sorts of things. Not I did this or I did that. And one of the most powerful things that's happened over these last years is everybody has slowed down. So if we ask Val a question, no one says to Val, do you like so-and-so, Val? And then we go on to the next topic of conversation. Everybody, and Dean in particular, his worker, has slowed that down. So we might go, ask that question, and then go, Val, do you like so-and-so? Yes or no? And then you might go, yeah. And that it's what it has taken for Valen, because it's so hard for him to get that out of his brain and onto his tongue. He needs to know that we'll wait long enough for him to put the effort in. And he knows that now, and therefore he's more likely to do it. The other exciting thing that happened this week, and this is all around creating the space for people to be making their own choices, his dad's moved out and they've had almond milk forever, right? So his father moves out and now there's almond milk and other milk in the fridge for the workers. And I was over there on Friday night because there was a little gap as we start up. And I go to make a coffee and he brings out the milk and goes, I want this milk. He's never done that before. It's just so exciting to see these tiny little advances that are really significant in terms of Val making decisions for his own life. And that's how you get people engaged. You have to actually listen. You have to wait. You have to kind of see what really impresses the person, what makes them seem to be excited and happy. All these things are part of it. And then slowly, as people relax and get into their lives in a different kind of way, then we can be better able to help that person engage. And I think mastery over yourself is a pretty powerful kind of engager. I know myself, when I've done something I didn't think I could do it, and then I do it and people are like, wow, it's pretty good. I'm thinking, yeah, that is quite like that. So I think it's and also making sure the person who's working with that person is well-known, well-liked by the individual, and that person respects the individual that they're working with. There's a mutual respect and like going on there. So you're creating a comfortable relationship for all sorts of opportunities to kind of grow. That's it.
Yeah. No, and I think just adding to that, I mean, if you had seen Jack, Gus and Cameron after they presented last week, they were all sort of, yes, I did it, and I think it's finding those opportunities where you can see the person shine and And I don't know whether you could tell, but reading is very difficult for Jack. So to be able to read what he did, that was a massive undertaking for him. So to actually then do that and be successful, that was really motivating for him to even practice. So I think it's finding those things that light somebody up, and that's where the discovery process comes in. I think too often we offer opportunities to our sons and daughters where we probably know it's not intrinsically motivating for them. So just be cautious of that.
I think so too. It's got to be something that's really important to them or has the potential to be important. You know, we're just trying some things out. Don't get to fall in love with your own ideas. I think that's one of the terrible things that can happen. I'm having a little laugh over here because Mary says, what about those people who've got illusions of grandeur? The people who think that they could do anything. Well, you know, I have to say, I think it's actually a great gift to not think that you've got any limitations, but I understand exactly the dilemma. And I think the more that we get into reality with people, and people don't have to escape into unreality as a way to manage the unmanageable parts of their lives, people will get better at understanding what they can and can't do. If people have got stuff that really is something they can be proud of, they'll be less inclined to try and magnify their their skills. But I understand what you're saying.
Maybe the grandeur can come elsewhere. I mean, Jack now thinks he's famous, so
Yeah.
another way of finding that notoriety, which is probably what she's after. It's just probably unpacking that as well.
It is. It's being observed.
And maybe someone other than you, Mary, unpacking that with her. So, like me, I'm trying to move away as the parent and try and get somebody else in there to try and understand what is it about being famous that that sort of really inspires her to go down that road.
Oh, get over yourself, Jan. Of course she wants to be famous. Everyone wants to be famous. I want to be famous.
Yeah, let's maybe look at the cons of that. Yeah.
Leanne just said, but Jack is famous.
Yes, well, right. And then he goes back to his regular life. And just another thing we're exploring at the moment, because Jack's on 5 weeks of school holidays at the moment, and what I found interesting, we're trying to engage through a connection. Jack, when he was about 13, did some work experience at the local pool, and he was just, doing the kiosk work and restocking, because at that point he had aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Probably had something to do with the fact that 2 of his older sisters have been lifeguards at that pool. And so he did some work experience there, and the same managers own a local small, really nicely run little IGA. And we've understood through Jack's work experience that an IGA could be a really nice setting for him to explore, and they often employ young people. And so we've gone through a connection we know to sort of suss it out a bit for us. And what we've learned is that the managers have probably remembered Jack when he was 13. And so we're really having to work hard to help them understand that he's actually grown and developed, and he's now 18 and he's been holding down these other jobs. So to really pitch that to them is really important. But it helped me understand that that's where their thinking was. They were remembering him as a 13-year-old boy, and probably not quite across how much he's grown and developed. That's really important.
Yeah.
We have another, and I'm just wondering, you were mentioning the job incentives and how we need to be really cautious of that. I'm just wondering whether you could explain what you mean by the job incentives, because people probably aren't really aware of what they are and might go after them without actually really understanding being offered.
Yeah, well, job incentives are offered by the federal government to help people who are not employed get employed. And they're there for lots and lots of people, not just people with disabilities, but for people who are long-term unemployed or whatever. And, the intention is quite good. It's really about trying to, help people get into work. But there are some employers who will actually take that on because it's no financial burden to them. They've got the money paid for that person to be there, so that everyone gets a warm and fuzzy feeling. Oh, this is great. I've got this person with disability working here. We're giving him a go, blah, blah, blah. But people don't get, hardly anyone gets, the danger of starting a job where no one's actually made a big commitment to continuing the job after the financial incentives are finished. So they might last, I don't even know what they are anymore. It's probably still 12 months or something like that, 6 months. So people get the job, they're in the job. People haven't got a real, from what I can see, many employers don't have a real big mandate to kind of make sure the person's working well in the job because they're not paying them. And then we get to the end of it and the person's no longer getting job, whatever it is. And so I reckon within 3 months, you could be pretty sure that person won't be there anymore if they haven't been properly trained to do that work and aren't actually doing that work properly. So you can't avoid some of those incentives because employers will ask, you know, is there an incentive with this person? And people will say, of course they will, yes, there is. But it's a problem when people go saying, you could have this person and you can get this money to do it. I think it's sell the person, their skills, abilities, and what they'll bring to the workplace. If the employer asks, yes, are there any incentives? Of course, you will say yes, but I think what you would say is yes, but you need to know that we are looking for a job that goes a lot longer than the federal government commitment to that job. We want this job to be as long as this person wants the work, you know? So it's just a little bit of a slippery slope, that's all. Can't hear you, Jan.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Anne. I think that's where we need to be really good at doing that positive introduction and doing a really good pitch.
Yep.
My daughter went for a job interview this morning and she was bringing her best self to that job interview. And I think so often we don't do that for people with disability. And I think this is where it's really important, just working one person at a time. Yep. So if a job coach or a DES provider or someone's going in to do sort of some carving for a job, they need to be really clear about who they're doing that for. And so they're talking about the person and not they. I think that was probably one of my things that I'd put on the list. It's not a C word, but you know,
it is almost a C word.
Yeah, it's almost. So
yep.
We've got a question here around resources and tools around the discovery process. I mean, we're certainly going to be going into that further with June Alexander. But I think what's really important to remember with the idea of the discovery process is that it's not, you don't do it and that's the end of it. Like, we're always discovering who the person is. And we've got to remember that, you know, it's the developmental model, isn't it? People are always growing, learning, opportunities come their way, and we learn more about the person. And I think that's really important to remember.
You know, following on from that point about the discovery process continues, I think one of the worst things that happens for people with disability is they start a job, they're in that job, they like that job, 15 years later, they're still in the same job. You know, now some people may love that. I'm not saying that that everyone, we know people, don't we, without disabilities who stay in the same job forever. But we know that now in the world, people are moving through jobs a lot quicker than they used to. And I think that sometimes people end up in work in the same job because their family and the job centre says, oh, you know, you don't want to lose this job because you won't get another one. Quite rightly. Because actually, once you've got one, it's very hard to, you know, if you lose it, it's very hard to find another one, it would seem. So, yes, I think that discovery thing continues continually throughout the life of the person in work.
Yeah. And I loved how earlier you talked about helping families dream for their children from a very early age. And something that we tried to do is when Jack was getting a bit older is help him notice the different jobs in the community and, like, you know, explicitly point that out.
Yes.
And so then eventually he had a massive list of all the different things he wanted to become. And then we just need to sort of sift through that. But I think at least he was imagining himself as a worker. And if your son or daughter doesn't have siblings that are older or younger that are working, find someone close by that is as a role model, and have that expectation that they're going to get a job as well.
Yeah.
I think it's crucial that we do that.
Do you know, one of the things that fascinated me about Jane is when she left school a year earlier than everybody else. No one could quite believe I let her leave school like at 17, not 18, because everyone was so nervous and worried about what people will do when they leave school. Anyway, she started to go to TAFE, and I was teaching her how to catch the bus in and out of town. And so I was like Wile E. Coyote. I taught her how to catch the bus, and then she would go up there, and I'd sneak up behind her and be behind a pillar. She'd drive to, in the bus to town, and I would be behind a pillar in town, then just make sure she got there and whatever. And she was dressed beautifully, like she had lovely clothes and a nice haircut and a lovely kind of handbag that was very classy. And Sharon, who was my work colleague and our dear friend, family friend at that time, said one day she drove up to the bus stop and Jane looked like a person who was really going somewhere. And I think that's actually what we're trying to achieve, is that we want people to look like they're really going somewhere. And wherever somewhere is where that person wants to be. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It just can be what makes that person happy,
Yep.
and fulfilled. Sorry, Jan, I think
Absolutely.
I interrupted you. You know I can't stop talking.
No, not at all. And I know you wanted to talk about the danger of or just to be aware of when you're setting up micro enterprise, and to actually hold that for the person it's set up for, and not expand to offer it to other people with disability. Do you want to just elaborate on that more?
All of us as parents, those of us who are parents, will know that there is this kind of, I don't know, unconscious thing where, like, all people with Down syndrome love music. Oh, I love people with Down syndrome. They all love music, people say. They're all sweet-natured, except for those of us who had sons and daughters who weren't sweet-natured and whose musical ability was horrendous. So this kind of follows on into success. So, when you see somebody's been successful in a certain area, they've created a micro enterprise and now the person's in it and whatever, and then you'll see other people think, oh, well, she's been good at that, so my son could do the same thing. But it's not like that. Every child, every person growing up and every person entering into work needs to be seen as an individual, not as a person with Down syndrome or a person with blah, and therefore they would like this thing because somehow or other, it's a thing like bowling. Until I found out that bowling had turned into a place where you could have a glass of wine, I was very, very negative about bowling. Now that you can have a glass of wine at bowling, I'm happy for people with disability to be there. But before that, it was like, oh, for God's sake, is it in the DNA or something? Is it in the water? I don't know. All over Australia, people go to bowling. So I think that danger of thinking that the international sport for people with disability is bowling, and the international work for people will be whatever somebody else has got, rather than actually creating a real opportunity for this individual, cast out information about them and creating that opportunity that way.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate on the bowling.
You will.
Well, it's just, I think what gets overlooked is why are people taking people to bowling? And I think a lot of it comes down to that success because it's a predictable sport. But if they actually open their eyes to all the other predictable sports like rowing, look at the success Cameron from last week has had in rowing. It's very predictable and repetitive. Archery, there's just so many other options out there. But I think we get a bit lazy and just think, oh, let's go bowling. So, enough about that.
But what's interesting, Jan? My nephew Declan is a real high class AFL player, and he plays in a team that's quite competitive. Anyway, he didn't post this, but somebody posted this thing where there's a guy on that team who has autism who happens to be quite a good player, and what happened was his shoelace came undone, and one of the other players bent down and tied up his shoelace for him, and someone took a video of that, and it was. It was like beautiful to see somebody being so kind, but it was also that thing about showing him, in that way. But actually, the act of kindness was so lovely. This big boy there, tying up someone else's shoelaces. It was a lovely thing, and this is very competitive football, not something where it doesn't matter whether you win or I don't understand about football. Is there anywhere where it doesn't matter whether you win or lose? But this was like important, serious football. Of some kind.
Very important competition. We've just got a few questions. we find it difficult for our son to move from work experience to more permanent valued employee.
Yeah.
Has been working in the same roles in 3 different workplaces for 2 years. Never has paid employment been given as an option. How frustrating for you. Do you have any ideas?
Well, can I first say, I think we need to be very careful and mindful about work experience, because I think what can happen is people can be in, as you say, an endless round of work experience while we're waiting for the job, the real job. And I think that can be very, very dangerous. So, Jan, I had a conversation about this the other day about, well, what are we learning from the work experience? And after we've got those things we need to know, how about we move on to a real role now? And now we've got stuff that we can put in the CV and whatever, but that often doesn't happen. And the person ends up in an endless round of work experience, which I myself totally disagree with. And so after a certain point, it's not that anymore. And I don't really have any thoughts to give you right now, but actually I'm more than happy at some other point for us to have a conversation. If you get my number off Jackie, I'd be more than happy to talk to you individually about that, because I'd have to have a bit more of a thought about how you'd move from where he is to where he needs to be.
I think just what would be really important is actually really capture and get a clear understanding of what were the tasks that he has been doing in each different role, and then building that as part of that discovery process. I'm going to share in a couple of sessions' time what we did to capture that information around Jack's work experience that was in Year 10. And I think this is the danger of the SLES funding.
Yeah.
Only been offered when kids are leaving, when people are leaving school, because it's actually really more about the work experience and the way that system's been set up. Whereas, I think you've just got to go in with the pitch around paid employment and do this sort of discovery and then job matching process. So hopefully over the next few sessions that will become clearer for you. But by all means, get in touch with Nan or Imagine More and we can see where we can go. I'm not sure where you are at. Imagine More is also aligned with several different organisations around Australia, so we can link you with those organisations that might be able to help you through that process.
A lot of people agreeing there, Jan, about work experience being for school, and after school, then we start to look at real work for real money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And I would encourage you to ask those questions next week when we've got Jeannie Hodges joining us from the NDIA. We had to advocate very hard for Jack to get SLES funding early in Year 10, but it just made sense to us. But now our dilemma is, well, what investment of funding are they going to provide Jack now that he's finished the SLES funding, but he's only just turning 18? So I think there's some really good conversations to have for next week. So get your questions ready. And here's another question. Where can I find an organisation or person that can help with sensory issues, especially transitioning from one activity to another?
So the people, this is the sensory stuff is the province of occupational therapy. So you need to, if you've got occupational therapy, say if you've got an NDIA plan and there's therapy in it, you could get someone to do an assessment. It's called a sensory profile to see how the sensory system is impacting on the individual. Now, even with OTs who actually know about sensory and who actually do work in that area, often don't really understand how you can proactively provide stuff to people so that they can calm down and not end up, dysregulated and out of control. So I know a young man here who's 15 who I'm working with doing a behaviour plan, and actually if I get him to blow bubbles, let's say blow bubbles, or to blow, one of those rounded things, this is not stuff you can do out in the community, but sometimes it's handy to have these things even at home. All he needs to do is to blow those bubbles and he calms down. He practically goes to sleep. It's remarkable how much that calms his system down. And a little girl I'm working with who loves to blow bubbles, real bubbles, and have them kind of all over the place. The blowing actually gets your breathing in the right calibration. And we know that you can't be anxious if you're breathing deeply. So These are things that can make a big difference to people. So you need to actually be asking people, are you aware of how to, do you do work in the sensory system? Are you aware of sensory profiles and sensory diet? Can you help me in that kind of way? And see what people say. Probably need to interview a few people to get that. And there's some good books around as well, which we could probably put onto the website to help understand more about this.
Yep, thank you, Anne. That's awesome. And I just want to say to Annette too that Jack got the CERS funding early, and he did do we did engage a job coach to help him in work experience in Year 10, but then he's been using that funding in paid employment for Year 11 and 12. So, you can absolutely use it. You can self-manage it, and it's awesome. But my question for the NDIA is, well, what comes after that?
Yeah.
Because the DES support will not be enough for him. So that's for another conversation. Yeah. Another question here is, how do you balance the wishes of the family with the wishes of the child, especially when you're utilising the family networks?
Do you mean so the family doesn't necessarily listen to what the person's wanting to do?
I'm thinking so. I'm not sure who asked that question, but if you want to elaborate in the chat box, we can address that. But
just while we're thinking about that, I just see someone said they used a Handle consultant to do sensory profiling, and Handle is one of the things you can use to assess all that. And so you can look for a Handle consultant to help with that. Look that up in the net, and you might find a person close to where you live. That was Karina Gilligan that said that. So.
What does Handle mean?
It has I think it's an acronym, but I can't, me in acronyms, I can't remember. I don't know. I don't even know what my own initials mean, but never mind.
No, that's really good.
So what were we saying before I distracted and took us somewhere else, Jan? What were we saying?
It's about the balancing between the family wishes and the child. So, yeah.
I think this is such a sensitive area, isn't it? Because families are the right and proper people to be helping, especially a young person, get to where they need to be and to do what they need to do. And I think it's very hard for families to ever understand that other people might have a different point of view. And one of the questions I had in those years as a service provider in a very family-focused, very family-friendly service was, when does a family actually agree that a person who's been working with their son or daughter for a very long period of time might have a different take, but could still be a legitimate take on their son or daughter that would be different to theirs? Because that thing about people are so close in their families, but their other sons and daughters are out with all sorts of different other people. Sometimes you don't even know who your other children are. They're just out there, and you don't really get to see much about who they are when they're not at home. And so I think it is a bit complicated, and it's more complicated because in service land, we don't always trust service providers to really be able to have a good take on that. So it's complicated, but I understand the seriousness of that question, because I've had that question too. And I think all we can do is be kind, careful, straight, but not disrespectful, and raise things with families and see where you get to with it. And can I just say, I've got this little poem. You know how other people get their inspiration from God or the goddess or whoever it is that they get their inspiration from? I get mine from pop stars because I'm shallow. It's wine and pop stars for me. And my little thing I love to think about, my mantra is from Jewel, and it says, if there's one thing we could tell the world, it's that we'll all be okay. Not to worry, because worry is useless at times like these. I'll not be made idle or useless by despair. In the end, only kindness matters. And so in our work with families, I think, and, can I say, families in their work with service providers and others, a level of kindness needs to happen both ways, doesn't it? We both need to be practicing kindness and patience, because we're doing hard work. We're doing stuff that's not easy. So we have to be able to work together and be respectful of each other. And sometimes that's not easy.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I just think what it comes back to is the relationship. And I think if you can build a trusting relationship, then that's when you can start exploring,
absolutely,
really deeply exploring some options for an individual. And it just takes time. I just think you've got to give that relationship time. Mm-hmm. So good on you for asking that. And, yeah, and I guess another thing to add is if you're building relationships, it can't all be where the family's got to meet you in the office. Like, get out into the community.
That's right. Yeah.
Neutral territory could be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
I
think the days of the clinical practice might well and truly be over.
Let's hope so. Although that they seem to be wanting to do more and more testing. I know that's coming back to the NDIA.
We hate that, don't we?
Okay, I am mindful of the time. I do want to just highlight that Anne mentioned Project Search, that it's happening in Brisbane, and we were working closely with them to actually present for this conference. So we didn't land that for the virtual conference, but we do hope that we'll be able to get Nina to present on what's happening in that environment. I know that the Cincinnati group have been working really closely with Uniting Care. So if any service providers are interested in that concept, they can actually get in contact with them and explore it further. But my understanding is that the Cincinnati group will only work with Uniting Care rather than a range of different organisations within Australia. But you could probably do it in another way. So, get in contact, learn about how it is. I guess my only caution around that is that we understand that through evidence that people learn best on the job. So I'm not sure about the component around learning in a classroom setting, because often people find it really difficult to transfer that information into the actual job. So, it's really worth sort of unpacking that and saying, is this the best way? Maybe we try another way.
And try another way. I have to say, I totally disagree with the idea of teaching somebody a job anywhere other than where they're going to have their job. All the research says that people with disability, but I would say all of us learn best when we're learning in the job we're going to have, not in a job we haven't got yet. So I really think we shouldn't be wasting job coaches' time, federal government money, and our sons and daughters' time by doing this stuff where we're outside doing something. That's different to work experience in school. I'm not talking about that. But later on, where you need to learn your microwave is at home in your microwave. I still haven't learned how to use my microwave, just put things in and do whatever I can to get there. But you know what I mean? We do this stuff. It's all this rehearsal stuff rather than the real thing. So I'm all for the real thing.
Yeah. Well, Anne, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Can I just read out what Sherry said? Anne, you said you don't know what your name initials mean. I don't know your middle name, but the AG for Anne Greer is definitely awesome and glamorous. So
I love you, Sherry.
No, but thank you very much for joining our online conference, and
Pleasure.
we really look forward to doing some more work with you, hopefully later in the year.
Love
So
to.
those joining us next week, we'll have Jeannie Hodges from the NDIA. She will be talking about how supported employment, which used to be attributed to funding that goes towards the Australian disability enterprises, but can now be used in open employment support. So I'm really interested in hearing more about that, about SLEDS funding, and how the NDIA can support micro enterprises to grow and get established. So get your questions ready. We're really excited about this, but thank you so much for helping us understand so much more about how to best support people in employment, Anne.
My absolute pleasure. And can I just say, I just want to congratulate Jan and Jackie and everyone at Imagine More, because you've just been a force to be reckoned with and such a great support to families. And that's what we need. We so need to have people who help us believe that there's light, that there's opportunities, and hold aspirations for ourselves and our children, adult children with disabilities. So thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see you next week, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.